Welcome to the Beyond Fitness podcast with Melissa and Tobin Lamb, where we talk about fitness, lifestyle, nutrition, and everything beyond. Melissa Lamb with the Beyond Fitness podcast. Welcome to episode 2 and the start of our new series. So I wanted to kind of go into a topic that really weighs heavy on my heart and kind of made me who I am today. And that is the topic of childhood obesity. So Toby didn't really struggle much with this, so in this series, he's going to sit this one out. This is going to be kind of my thing. So we're going to discuss some topics, and they're going to be some heavy topics. And so before I really get into this episode and what the series is about, I do want to give a trigger warning so I don't waste your time. If you are uncomfortable hearing about mental health, suicide, self-harm, eating disorders, anything of that nature, bullying, traumas, I would probably skip out of this series just in case. But if you are ready and comfortable and want to learn more, then please stay tuned. So, to start off, I want to give you guys a little bit of background. I am an educator. I teach music education, teach middle school band, 6th through 8th grade. So it is the toughest period in these kids' lives, and it was probably my worst years of my life. So interesting that I chose this field, but there is a reason why, and I will unveil that in this series. As an educator, though, I had to take multiple courses in psychology specifically. I had to learn how to teach children with disabilities. Now, this is not really along the lines of obesity, but it was pretty helpful. Also had to take courses in developmental psychology and education psychology, so how kids are motivated to learn, how they learn optimally through their environment, and kind of the things that can affect their development through traumas. And obesity was one of those traumas that we discussed in my developmental psychology class, and it was actually the topic of my final paper for that class, and I still have my paper on my computer. But with that being said, I have done quite a bit of research on this topic. I have firsthand experience as an obese child myself. I've heard some stories from friends who were kind enough to share Messenger, and in the next few episodes I will probably have some guests on, maybe 2 guests at a time, to share their story and their background, and we'll kind of discuss back and forth how some of our experiences were similar and how they were different and how we kind of coped in different ways. And I'll ask them for any advice that they would give parents or educators out there who are dealing with children who struggle with their weight as well. So again, today's episode is just going to be a simple run through of my experience in school, the bullying, how I coped in a world that was not created for children my size, and just kind of the school aspect of my life. And we're going to get into, further into, I guess, my home life story and how my parents tried to help me change my lifestyle and some mistakes that they made along the way, because everyone is human and we all make mistakes. So let's be real, they made some mistakes. I'm sure I will make mistakes when I'm a parent too. And I'm sure that many other parents, all parents, have made mistakes along their journey as well. So in this episode, we're going to talk about bullying, school desks, bullying, clothes, all that stuff, all that fun stuff. So school, like I said, middle school was the hardest years. Elementary school for me, I started getting pretty chunky around 2nd grade, but I wasn't really totally aware of my weight in elementary school. I wasn't really bullied for it at the time. We were all kind of, I guess, naive, and we just weren't really thinking about that. 6th grade is where things started to go downhill. Of course, my entire elementary school, 5th graders went on to 6th grade at our feeder school, and there was another elementary school that fed into that school as well. So it was like half kids that I recognized from elementary school, and then half kids I didn't know ever growing up. So going into 6th grade, I remember particularly my first experience with bullying and kind of the traumas of knowing that this world was not made for kids my size was PE class, as it is for a lot of kids. PE class was a nightmare for me. Obviously, I always wanted to be involved in sports in elementary school, but never made it onto the teams because I wasn't physically fit enough. And I was probably around this time over 50 or 60 pounds overweight, but you got to keep in mind I was like 4 foot something. I was like 11 years old at the time, so I was a short little nugget. But in PE class, I would get debilitating chest pain. We would have to run laps around the gym, and my chest would just hurt so bad. I'd have to slow down and stop, and I think everyone around me, including myself, just assumed that it was just me being out of shape. I didn't know that I had any medical issues at the time, but aside from that experience, which is pretty common for a lot of kids to be a little bit out of shape and not be able to keep up, in the locker room, we actually had situations. Some kids had flip phones at the time, so that shows my age. I am a millennial through and through. I am 27, just turned 27 this month. So that gives you an insight on the timing of this. This is probably 2005, 2006. Some of us had flip phones, and on those flip phones were cameras. And this is the first era of sexual assault. This is the first case of sexual assault in schools, and it was kids taking pictures, and I'm sure there's other forms of cameras back in the day too, but yeah, kids were taking pictures of each other in the locker rooms. By each other, I mean they were taking inappropriate pictures, unsolicited pictures that people didn't want, and so it got to the point where I started wearing my uniform, my school uniform, over my PE clothes, and when you're big, that's kind of hard to do. So that was like the only way that I could work around it. That's when I became most self-conscious of my body. That's when I didn't want to see it in the mirror. I knew that these girls were trying to take pictures of me because they thought that I was gross looking, because they would laugh about them and they would show them to each other. And what was the PE teacher doing? I have no clue. I assume she probably didn't want to have to witness girls changing, because that's weird. So she was kind of in her office in the locker room, but nowhere near us. And so one girl finally went in and told her what was going on. They put a stop to it, but by that point, I wanted out of there. I couldn't keep up with the other kids. I was embarrassed about my physical abilities. I was embarrassed about my body. I didn't want to have to change in front of the girls. So I went home crying one day, and my parents finally called up to the school and, for health reasons, demanded that they put me in a different class. And so that's when I got art, where things got a little worse. So in art class, my art teacher decided that they had to use the restroom, and they left the classroom. That's the number one rule as a teacher, that you never do. Never leave your class by themselves. Of course, being a little bit down the hall with the door wide open and popping in every 10 seconds is one thing, but I think this teacher got up, went to the bathroom for a solid 5-10 minutes, and that's all it took for a set of held back 8th grade boys, because this is a mixed class. Again, I was 11. And this kid was probably about 16. We discovered that he was held back for quite a few years. He was in 8th grade, and he decided to target me and another girl that I was sitting next to. She was a really close friend of mine at the time. She didn't speak any English, and we communicated through drawings. We'd draw pictures with each other, and we would color them, and we just kind of have to point to things because we didn't speak the same language, and we just became close because we were both quiet and super shy. And the boy came up and he decided, oh, you're never going to get to see one of these, so he decided to unzip his pants. And I didn't look. I don't know what happened. I looked away, and before I knew it, he ran back to his seat. The teacher walked back in, and I just wasn't the same since. So that experience really kind of freaked me out. I became really reserved and quiet. And as I was walking down the stairs leaving that class, the school guidance counselor noticed that I wasn't acting myself. She said I always smiled and waved, but that day I wouldn't. And she pulled me aside, and I'm glad that she noticed that something was off, because I wasn't going to tell anyone. I just was going to keep it to myself. A lot of the kids that I went to school with, this is a super inner city school, were exposed to a lot of violence growing up, and so they would jump other kids or beat them up, or threaten to bring a knife to school and hurt you. And so I didn't want them to come after me, but she talked me into kind of opening up about it, and the kid ended up getting suspended, and of course the buddies, the friends that were in that class, threatened to jump me or beat me up. And with that teacher leaving the classroom, I didn't feel safe, and my parents tried to put me into a different school, but unfortunately it was a lot harder to transfer at the time. They wanted to put me in a different district. It was literally, the borders of the district were right across the street from our neighborhood. That district said no. The school literally suspended him for 3 days. He was back in a matter of days. They just told my parents that we had to work around it. My parents were going to have to drop me off earlier in the morning so that I could be watched by a teacher, and then they were supposed to be picking me up first in the pickup line to pick me up early. And that's frustrating, because it was like I was getting punished for what that kid had done to me. And so I just kind of became a target after that. and I hated school at that point. I was actually enjoying 6th grade up to this moment, and my parents finally, I felt unsafe and I was sick of it, and I wanted to go to online school. My brother was doing online school at the time, and I wanted to do the same thing, and my parents knew that that wasn't really the best option for me, so they threatened the school. They threatened to go to the news, and finally something more severe was done to the student, and they were no longer in that school, and the kids who threatened to jump me were spoken to and taken care of, and everything kind of stopped by the 7th grade year. But some of the other crappy things that happened in 6th grade, of course, I think a lot of us in middle school, especially those of us who didn't quite have our glow-ups until later in life, we would get asked out as a joke, or a dare, or whatever. A boy would come up to you and say, "Hey, can I have your number?" And then you would say, "Okay," and then they would laugh in your face and say, "No, it was just a joke." Or one of the kids would come up and then say, "Hey, my buddy thinks you're cute and he wants to ask you out," and then you'd look back and see who the heck they're talking about, and there's just a giant group of guys laughing in the background. That was the story of my life. I learned quickly to ignore them. That was too good to be true. So that's how I coped. And I had a lot of trust issues with people, so I just didn't talk to anyone. I became really reserved, and I didn't make a whole lot of friends after that. And I will say one of the struggles that I faced in school was fitting into the desks. And it seems so silly, but that's such a big deal to me back then. And I can see it still being kind of a big deal now as an adult. And it was something that I dealt with actually in college. My husband's dad and I were actually talking about this on Thanksgiving, because he's a college professor. And the desks, people don't think about that. Teachers don't think about that. I didn't even really remember it until recently. Fortunately, in my profession as a band director, I don't have to worry about desks. But desks were my worst enemy. We had different kinds of desks when I was in school. One of the most common ones, the ones that I hated the most, were those little metal desks. They usually came in like yellow or green or blue or red. And they had the wooden tops on them, the metal part underneath, the seat was wood, the back of it was wood, and the metal piece underneath had like a little shelf for your books. And those were the absolute worst nightmare for any child who was overweight. They were really small. They looked like kindergarten-sized desks, like elementary desks, and that's probably where they came from. But the little tabletop was so close to the seat, it would squeeze into my stomach, and then my back would be flat against the seat behind me, and I couldn't move back or forth. And what sucked was I was also super blind growing up. I've worn glasses since kindergarten, so here I am hunched over my desk, and now I have kyphosis, and I still think that's probably a partial cause. But I couldn't fit in the desks, and not only that, but they would squeak out the wazoo. Everyone in the class, if your desk squeaked, they were making fun of you. So of course, me not wanting to be the center of attention, and me being terrified of being bullied, and I just wanted to protect myself and protect my energy, I sat as still as I possibly could. I tried not to breathe too hard, because I was so worried that my desk would squeak. And I'd feel so embarrassed when it squeaked, and it would annoy me. I could not focus in school. I couldn't. And the classes that had those tiny desks are the classes I did the worst in, academically. And they were the classes that I hated. And it wasn't the teacher. It wasn't the subject. It was just because I couldn't concentrate and I couldn't focus, and I was so uncomfortable. I couldn't fit in the desks. And it was embarrassing. It was humiliating. And I remember there was one other kid in school who was bigger than me. And he, even though the teacher gave him an assigned seat, he helped himself to the back at a table. And I remember the teacher actually getting onto him and writing him up and going off on this kid because he wouldn't sit at one of these desks. And to this day, it breaks my heart because he couldn't fit. I couldn't fit, and he was bigger than me. There was no way that he could fit. He's a boy, he was taller than me, and he was broader and larger, and he could not fit in these desks. And looking back, he really wasn't that. Yes, he was overweight, but he wasn't, that big. There definitely could have been kids that were larger than him, but, that teacher just didn't understand. They didn't know where the kid was coming from. They thought he was being rebellious. But what it was is He was tired of being bullied. Every time he tried to squeeze in the desk, he couldn't get out easily, and the kids would make fun of him walking by, and he was also a quieter kid. And that's something that I think a lot of educators are out of touch with. A lot of parents don't realize that their kids struggle with at school, and that may be why kids who are larger, who are overweight, could be struggling, is just difficulty concentrating. Another thing that I struggled with in middle school was comparing myself to everybody else in the room. I'd look around and say, okay, that person's not that much smaller than me. Okay, that person's bigger than me. Maybe they'll be the target of the bullying in this class. Am I going to be the target? Am I the biggest one in the class? Am I going to be the one with the nicknames? That was always the first thing I did when I entered a classroom on the first day of school, was figure out who's going to be the target of the bullying. And that's horrible, but it's like survival of the fittest. Like, I don't want to be the target. Please tell me there's somebody else in here that can be a target. Like, I just want people to not notice me. I just want to be safe. But, that's what I realized. It's not only the desk made me feel embarrassed, made me feel unsafe because I was a target to bullying. But then some of these teachers also in these same classes didn't seem to mitigate the bullying. And so when you have your hierarchy of needs in education, we talk about this a lot in like PD sessions, but when you have your hierarchy of needs, the basis of your needs is safety. And if you don't feel safe, then you've broken that foundation, and everything on top isn't going to matter. It's hard to achieve things and be successful and driven when you don't feel safe and you don't have your basic needs taken care of. And some kids, they may feel safe, but maybe they're in such poverty that they can't afford food. Then that part of their needs, that part of their basis of their foundation is broken off. And so you have to have those layers intact in order to be successful. And what's hard for me is that band was the only class that I really connected with in middle school. And that really kind of shaped my future academically. I struggled in math. I struggled in science. I struggled in some of these classes that I really wish I was better at now. Now that I'm into fitness and health and nutrition, I really wish that I was better in those classes. But looking back, and I just kind of connected this today, looking back at all of this, this portion of my life, I'm starting to realize that the classes that I struggled with in school, the subjects that I struggled with, had a lot to do with how comfortable and safe I felt. Between the bullying, between fitting in the desk, between, how far of a walk the class was. Am I out of breath when I enter the room? Am I going to be bullied for panting from walking 20 feet because I'm so out of shape? Are the kids noticing that? Are they laughing about it? Are they writing notes about it? Some of the stuff was in my head, of course. Some of it really was in my head, and the kids probably weren't thinking anything of it. But some of it really was a genuine concern because I had seen other kids bullied for the same things. And I had been bullied for similar topics. So, those are things that, we have to be diligent about as educators, is mitigating those situations and stopping the bullying in its tracks. And it's hard because kids like me, I was so scared of attention, I didn't even talk to my teachers. Again, that guidance counselor caught me in the hallway and discovered it. So, if you notice that a kid's not totally themselves that day, I always take a minute and I pull them aside and I talk to them, because you never know what's really going on. They may not tell you unless you talk to them. And if they don't want to tell you, then you can't force them to talk to you, but you can at least, let them know that you're there for them and let them know that you are a safe place for them to go to. And sometimes they'll open up. Sometimes they'll come to you after class and they'll tell you what was really going on. And you kind of treat that kid a little bit different, give them a little bit of extra love that day, and they'll kind of open up and they'll start to feel better. But that's one of the reasons that I genuinely love band, is because I felt safe in there. Number one, there's no desks. Band doesn't have desks. You have a chair and like an open row, and then you have music stands, and that music stand you can adjust whichever way you want to adjust it. Like, there was no, I wasn't claustrophobic. I wasn't feeling like tightly packed in. And not only that, but there was a no bullying zone. My teacher did not accept that. She didn't allow that in her classroom, and she stopped it in its tracks. And I remember that's where a lot of the bullying in middle school happened. It started to happen, and she always caught it. And I don't know how she always found out about it, but she was always able to catch it. And it's probably the same way, just noticing that, a kid is off that day. But I remember her specifically pulling us out in the hallway and talking to us, one at a time. And then if she needed to, she would transfer the information onto the counselor. And that's where I kind of learned my technique with education myself, and that's what I do with my kids as well. They enter my room, they don't look like they normally do, then I pull them off to the side and we talk. I won't start class until I figure out what's going on. But that was one of the reasons that I excelled in music and why it became a passion for me. And looking back, I'm starting to realize that makes sense. I felt safe in there. I knew that if someone was going to bully me, that I could tell my teacher because I knew that she would do something about it. I knew she wouldn't make me feel ashamed. I knew that she would talk to the kid in a way that wouldn't come back on me. I knew that she would make me feel better. I knew that she would get me the help that I needed. And I didn't have any restraints, any restrictions. So I felt comfortable. I was able to be myself in band. All my other classes, I was selectively mute, completely silent. That's how I coped with the bullying. Wanted to be far away from attention. I wouldn't even eat in the cafeteria because I just wanted to sit down, bury my head in a book, and read. And I wanted the rest of the world to leave me alone. I didn't want anyone to notice me. But in band, I was goofy, and I was myself. I was genuinely who I wanted to be, and I had friends in there. And that's actually where I met a friend, and I'll tell the story. This is a tough one, and if that friend from 6th grade sees this, I love you and I forgive you, and I don't hold any grudges against you anymore at all. But this friend, we were really close. Like, we went to each other's house all the time. We had, like, sleepovers. We really enjoyed each other's company. She played saxophone in band, and I played clarinet. We were in different classes, beginning classes at the time. But she went on to, I think she ended up moving in 7th grade. But, we were really close. But in school, she wouldn't really talk to me. And she finally told me, texted me one day. Again, this is a little, what's it called? I don't know. Shorthand that you got to do on the flip phones. But one day she texted me and she said, I would like to keep our friendship private at school. So in other words, she wanted to keep it a secret. Like, she was embarrassed to be around me. So to me, that told me I might have a decent personality. Like, people like my personality, but I'm so ugly that no one wants to be seen with me. And that's how I felt from that situation on. And I have a feeling that it was just because she had crappy friends. She had crappy friends who probably made fun of her for being around me because they were jealous. They didn't have a friendship like that. Like, her and I were super close. Like, we could make really embarrassing jokes to each other and it wasn't a big deal. And we could, like, be completely ourselves. And I think that maybe her friends were jealous. And that's why they started making fun of her for being around me. And it kind of drifted us apart. And before I knew it, she kind of moved off and we never talked again. But, she was, at the time, I thought she was a really good friend. Looking back, that's really crappy, but we all make mistakes. And, one of my coping mechanisms, and I'm going to be really open and honest here, and I regret it, I'm embarrassed to this day about it, but one of my coping mechanisms was to bully my bullies back. So I decided to stoop to their levels, and I got into, like, an internet bullying brothel, whatever, not brothel, what's it called? I don't know, like a little cyber fight or whatever with one of the kids in band that was bullying me a little bit, the one that my teacher intervened with several times. And we didn't really have Facebook or anything like that back in the day, so we had MySpace. And we had a website called Pizzam, I think that's what it's called. And you can, like, make your own web page, and you can put, like, a comment box on there, and you can have, like, conversations with people on your page. And then we had these little sparkly GIFs and graphics and stuff. That's where I started to kind of really get into, like, web design, was designing my little Pizzam page. But of course, my little band friends and I, and this kid was a friend of mine, and he and a friend of his got on my page, and I think they called me the B word. I think it was in a playful way, but I just wasn't used to that kind of humor, and he had made fun of my chin, my double chin and stuff in band, so I thought it was mean. I thought it was intended to hurt me. So I was at my friend's house, and her and her cousin and I decided to respond something mean back. And before we knew it, we found ourselves in the guidance counselor's office for cyberbullying each other. So, regret that to this day. That was me stooping to their level. Him and I just decided not to talk ever again. He ended up moving away for a couple years. Turns out he was also being relentlessly bullied, and he had a lot of struggles growing up, and so I don't hold it against him. Again, I've forgiven all of these people, but I am going to share these stories because they do impact who I turned out to be today. They do impact my timeline, my life, my story. And even though it seemed negative at the time, they did impact me in positive ways nowadays, because now I've learned to forgive and to understand and to empathize where other people come from. But that leads me on to another story. 7th grade, I took on the nickname of Big Mac Girl. There was this girl in my class, and I mean, I wasn't the only target, so I didn't feel like as bad about it, but I did kind of stoop to her level once or twice. She had pretty bad cystic acne, and she always called me Big Mac Girl. She made fun of my shoes. She called me Walmart because I wore like the same pair of like Walmart pants every day because clothes were hard to come by when you're big. And I discussed that in one of my videos in the past. But we couldn't really find clothes that fit me comfortably that didn't drag on the ground. So I'd have maybe one or two good pairs of pants, and that's all I would wear all year long. School uniforms actually ended up being a nightmare for me because it was harder for me to find school uniforms in the right colors that fit as an obese child than it was to find regular clothes that fit. So if you're watching this and you're an administrator, please keep that in mind. As the obesity numbers and childhood obesity keep climbing, please keep that in mind. Uniforms are much harder for obese children to find that fit, and that is a huge source of bullying, and the uniforms were implemented, and part of the excuse for implementing them was to mitigate bullying in regards to clothing, but it does not work. It didn't work for me. It made the bullying worse, in my opinion. I was bullied far less wearing normal clothes than I was wearing uniforms because I had to wear the same thing every day. And when you grew up in a poor family and you're big, that makes it even more challenging. So please, administrators, hear me out. That's a huge deal for kids right now. But yeah, she called me Big Mac. She made fun of my clothes. I wore the same thing all the time. That's really all I had. I hated clothes shopping. I didn't want to go, so I wore hand-me-down. I wore my brother's hand-me-down, like large, extra large t-shirts all the time at home, and then I wore like my 2 uniform outfits every day to school. And then eventually they would get holes between the thighs. My thighs would rub together so much, and I'd be down to one pair, or I'd be walking around with holes in my pants, and the kids would make fun of me for that. Like it just didn't matter. And I think in middle school, kids just, that's how they cope with their traumas, is they bully people. And that's one of the topics I think we're going to get into with a guest, is how they had a similar coping mechanism to that. But yeah, sometimes the kids that are bullying other kids are going through a lot themselves, and that's something to explore as an educator too, to understand that there might be a reason that that kid is doing what they're doing, especially if they seem like a sweet kid. They might be trying to stoop down to their level. They might be thinking, of ways to protect themselves. It's just survival in middle school, trying to figure out how to get out of that limelight, how to become one of the bullies so that you fit in. And it's tough. There might be a bigger source out there than just that kid. And I do have a situation right now where I have a very sweet kid who, for some reason, is stooping down to that level and becoming one of the bullies themselves. So it's something that we are working through right now. But I think that's all I really have to share as far as school goes. And then my next episode, next week, I will be getting into more details on how my childhood home life was affected, and some advice on how to talk to your kids about their weight, how not to talk to them about their weight, how to go about a lifestyle change, and some mistakes that were made with me. And I love my mom and dad, so this isn't going to bash them at all. Love you guys. I promise I'm not going to throw you under the bus. But I will discuss some ways in which they thought were helpful, and which a lot of parents think are helpful, but actually end up doing more harm than good. So stay tuned for next episode. Hope you guys got some use out of this. This was definitely targeted towards school-related issues. So yeah. I'm going to go ahead and end this here. Next episode may feature a guest. No promises. Thank you guys for watching. I really appreciate you. Please subscribe to the podcast. It will be on Apple Podcasts soon if it isn't already. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Stay tuned for more episodes.